Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show, and I feel it's such a privilege every week to talk to smart CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs of ranging different companies from Netflix, Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, LendingTree. Go check out some of the archives. There's some great episodes back there. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And quick shout out to Carl Smith of Bureau of Digital, who helped introduce me to today's guest. This is part of our top agency founder series, and our guest is Brett Harned. He brings nearly 20 years of experience in communications and project management, along with a passion for teaching and community building, to his roles as an advocate for the digital project management community. For years, Brett worked as a digital project management consultant and coach. He's also worked on some really interesting digital projects, which we will ask him about, including for Zappos, MTV, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Alaska Air, and many more. And in 2012, while at the Happy Cog agency, Brett helped to form the Bureau of Digital, which I've been a member of for a number of months now. It's a great community, and founded the Digital PM Summit, the first annual conference for digital project managers. And Brett is also the author of Project Management for Humans. And of course, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25 Media. And I know, Brett, you have done podcasts before on both sides of the microphone, so you know how wonderful it is. You get to talk to smart folks like yourself. And so if anyone's curious about how to do a podcast effectively for a B2B business, send us an email, support@rise25media.com. All right, Brett, it's such a pleasure to have you here today. And, you were there at the beginning for the founding of the Bureau of Digital, which is now some 800 members strong and growing like wildfire. I'm really curious to know what the origin story was like, what it was like at the beginning. Especially what's fascinating to me is that this is a brand new industry that did not exist 20 years ago, and now digital agencies are becoming a really amazing element of the economy. And obviously that's where we play these days. But what was it like in the beginning, the very beginning? I understand we were chatting before, and you just started locally, started meeting with other people because you didn't have that community.
Yeah, so the origin story of the Bureau is a little different from the origin story of the Digital PM Summit. The idea of the Bureau really came out of, if I'm remembering this correctly, kind of a business development concept. Our Joe Rinaldi, our biz dev guy at the time, had this idea that it would be really cool to be able to just connect with other business owners and talk shop. So at the time, Greg Hoy and Greg Story, the owners of Happy Cog, basically jumped on that concept and said, let's start an event called Shop Talk. So they started this little kind of retreat getaway, which is now called Owner Camp, right? So it's a few days, they go away, they have some meaningful conversations just about the way that they run their shops. So that was kind of the first event that spun out of that. And I jumped on that because at that time, being a part of Happy Cog, which is a great agency that still is around, founded by Jeffrey Zeldman, very much rooted in the idea of learning, right? Like learning on the job and learning and teaching also, and just sharing. And I really loved that concept. And as a project manager at the time, I felt like I didn't really have that community. So seeing that founders of agencies were finding each other, and my friends who were designers or UX leads had their communities, really made me take a deeper look. And so, locally, I joined the local Project Management Institute chapter. Very quickly realized that was not really the place for me. There weren't people working in digital who were going to those events, and they were really it just wasn't my space. I'll leave it at that.
So these are project managers managing different types of projects, but not in the digital
corporate
world.
and construction and
Old
IT.
school. Okay.
Not, very different culturally in terms of workplace. So I ended up, and of course had gone to tons of conferences and always felt like, wow, these conferences are great and I'm learning things, but there's never anything specific for me. So I ended up spinning up a little meetup in Philadelphia, basically called it DPM Philly, and attached myself to a design meetup and said, hey, can we run an event where you bring your PM and you ask people to bring their PMs? And that's how I started the list. And then that meetup grew and grew. And then I went to Greg and said, hey, there's actually a community of people here and we're doing events. This is before we even called it the Bureau of Digital. So
and these are like monthly events, just like a monthly meet up at a bar type
events,
of thing? Okay.
Meet up at a bar, round table. PMs love to talk about the challenges that they're facing. And when you get them in the room together, they're like, oh my gosh, me too. So that was really comforting, right? Essentially, I went to those guys and said, hey, I think there's an opportunity here for an actual event. Is this something that you'd get behind and do? And they said, yeah, let's do it. So
and what was the sales pitch for you to your agency? What was the business case for why they should get involved in that? Was there an argument that was going to lead to business, or was it just like something that they do out of the goodness of their own heart, or why?
I think it was a couple of things. I think it was this idea that there was a gap, right? At the time, there was a gap for communities for people like me or people in leadership roles. And that's really kind of where I think the Bureau started, was let's find and build community for these folks. So it was more of a community building, goodness of your heart kind of situation, but also it was, hey, maybe this is also a business that we can spin out of the agency, which is essentially what happened. So yeah, we set up that first event. We limited it because we weren't sure what the interest would be. We limited the capacity to 150 people, and we sold it out in 30 days.
Wow, that's still not small, because I've done events myself, and I don't know if you were on the hook for a hotel, if it was a multi-day event or what, but that's nerve-wracking.
It was nerve-wracking. We did not go the hotel route at that point. We hosted it at WHYY in Philadelphia. So it was in a big television studio. And it was 2 days. I had to hire, speakers to fill those days. I myself gave a keynote. I had a pretty aggressive goals with that. And the response to it was amazing. In the second year, we more than doubled it.
Wow.
So I guess that was 2013. Now we're heading into 2021 and doing another event. So it's been going well. And I have to say, the community has grown in this amazing way. And anytime we walk away from those events, I always tell people I feel bad in the actual in-person events when we could do them, because I would, walk down the hallway trying to get from one place to another and be stopped by, a handful of people saying, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I never thought that I would meet people who do the same thing that I do, which is just that just makes me feel so good, because what we're doing is providing a place where people can grow professionally and learn from one another and feel like they have a community, they have a place to go where they can meet people and talk about the challenges that they face in a really comfortable way that helps them to level up in their careers. That's really meaningful to me.
What are a few of the secrets that you learned over the years to nurturing a community like this? What's the secret sauce?
Yeah, it's actually really tough. It's a lot of kind of testing ideas and seeing what resonates for people. For this community specifically, people are busy. So getting their attention is not easy. Finding the right topics and the right kind of format is really important. And what I've found is people don't necessarily like to go to a conference and just listen to a talking head. They want to hear from someone who is in it and doing what they're doing. They want to be able to relate to that person. And I think that's really important. I think the other aspect is providing a level of engagement. So a big part of all of our events at the Bureau are about people just sharing and discussing and asking each other questions. It's not about us hiring the best speakers and putting them on stage and making a presentation. It's more about them talking to each other.
Mm-hmm. And then, you started, this a very different world now, especially post-pandemic, as we come out of the pandemic, hopefully. And we're recording this in August of 2021. So it's a little debatable whether we're coming out of it or still in the thick of it, right?
Yeah.
But, a very different world in 2013, 2014, especially the way that people engage with one another online. So how did you keep the community going between the live events that you did? Because you started with the live events, you started with the meetups, broadened it, became more of a real conference. And then how did you keep that community alive?
Well, the amazing thing was that after that first conference, other conferences in other countries started to pop up. So immediately it started to become this kind of global thing.
Unrelated to you, these are other organizations?
Unrelated to me, but I would be reached out to about them. And I would travel and speak at those events or even host them, which is really cool and exciting for me for a lot of reasons. But so the idea just kind of caught on. On top of that, the meetup idea caught on. So at the second conference, we had a session about this is how you can start your local meetup, where I would kind of tell my story about what we did, share some tactics, and then have others kind of share those tactics as well. So essentially, those local meetups started popping up, and those were kind of in some way connected back to our event. So, I think we had that level of engagement that wasn't necessarily related just to our event, but the community at large, right? Like we're not trying to own a community, we're just trying to grow it and provide a place for people to come and meet. So the local meetups happen, but also, through the Bureau, there are other opportunities. There are digital PM camps. There are channels in the Slack group for digital PM specifically. There are sessions that we do. There are workshops that we do as well. So there are a lot of opportunities out there. And like I said before, businesses have grown out of this as well. There's a website called the Digital Project Manager that is an amazing resource for people if they're looking for tools and templates and blog articles and things like that. There are other kind of like training businesses that have cropped up out of that. Like I said before, I published a book about it that is being used in classrooms across the world and things like that.
That's pretty cool.
So it's awesome. I mean, it's cool how many opportunities it has created for a variety of people in a variety of different ways.
Yeah. Before our business became as focused as we are now on helping B2B businesses to create podcasts, we were really an event business for a number of years where we did events. And a lot of them were like in the e-commerce space, which is very competitive space. And one of the challenges to building any community is getting people to be vulnerable and to share, especially if there are competitors in the room. So how'd you crack that nut? How do you get people to come together and, if they're, a web shop, there's another web shop in the room. How do you get them to come together in a local community and share best practices with one another?
Yeah, well, I want to say it's about kind of like modeling behavior. Like you stand up and you share something and then people immediately drop their guard. But there's another thing that was created early on at the Bureau for those small kind of gathering, those kind of camp events where there's an oath. And the oath basically says like, I'm going to share things, I'm going to be vulnerable, and I'm not going to share these things outside of the room. And I think and people have to actually, it's on screen, people read along, it's done, it's a thing that is done, right? So it's kind of like—
Did you feel silly initially when you did this?
I mean, listen, it's done by creative people, so it's written in a way that's a little cheeky and fun. It might mention like, I won't mention any of this even after I've had a few drinks or something like that, Yeah. But I think that's part of it. It's just like giving people permission to feel like they can be vulnerable and share, because then they start to recognize that, oh, there are people in the room who have the same point of view or the same experience as me. And maybe if I talk to them, I might learn something or find a different approach to that challenge or that thing that we were talking about. But I'm with you. It's tough. It's tough to get people to open up, but I think it's very much for the event organizer about setting the tone, and kind of giving people permission to be that way. Because I think just in general, as professionals, we're not vulnerable for whatever reason.
Sure.
But there are times where I can really benefit from it.
People struggle with it. We talked mostly about the community building side, but let's shift to talking about the event management side of the equation and
Sure.
some of the best practices there. You touched on it a little bit. You mentioned that it's important. You found that not just having big speakers, but allowing people to have conversations, for them to share, to hear from people that are not just like some highfalutin author or something like that. But what other, in terms of best practices, have you learned over the years in putting together as many events as you have?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I think location is one, right? Finding a location where you actually host the event. So we've done our event. The first one was in Philadelphia. I'm in the Philadelphia area. We've done it in Austin, Texas. We've done it in Orlando, Florida. We've done it.
So a
Las
bigger
Vegas.
city where people want to go is what you're saying.
Yeah, finding a place that's affordable to travel to, where you can find a place that's nice enough and can kind of like fit the amount of people that you want, obviously, is really important. But I think even aside from location, it's more about the programming. It's more about finding the topics or the themes or ideas that people want to talk about, the things that people are struggling with and want to learn more about or get better at. And I've been known to throw out surveys or even just get on the phone with groups of people and just talk to them about what's top of mind for them. I think the other thing for the Digital PM Summit is, it's, again, a new audience, a new space where there aren't necessarily a ton of those kind of highfalutin author speakers. They're out there, but again, those aren't necessarily the people that our audience wants to hear from. So finding opportunities where, I'm building a community, but also giving those people an opportunity to be on that stage and to kind of grow into like the business owner or the next top kind of digital project manager, whatever it might be. That sounds so ridiculous, but giving people the opportunity to be the event as well, like be a part of the event, but also be an attendee. And Carl feels the same way about this at our in-person events. Like, we want our speakers to show up and attend. We think, we're really conscious of the event experience overall, and just creating a space that feels like people want to be there. How many professional conferences or events have you been to where it feels like half the room is gone by the end of the day because you're in a location where they just want to be out in the sun or check out something else? But that does not happen to our events.
Let me press you on that. So what's a specific example of ways in which you did that? You built that so that people feel like they want to be there?
Yeah, so building in sessions. So in terms of programming, it's not just a block of keynote presentations. It's maybe we do a couple keynote presentations and then people go into breakout groups based on specific topics, or maybe they're assigned to a room based on the size of their agency or the industries that they work in. And then there might be a mini workshop in the middle of the day. So there's more interaction. So you're not just sitting there listening to someone. And then we might come back for a keynote at the end of the day. So I think programming is really kind of the biggest piece of that. And I was really concerned about that going into our first online summit, knowing that the interaction on Zoom is not the same interaction. The session, a workshop session, is not going to feel the same when it's online.
We can't have happenstance, just run into someone in the hallway, chat over a drink and, next to the
Yeah.
bar or whatever.
Yep. But, I think we've done, and I think when I say we, I mean we collectively, like human beings, we've done a lot to kind of make ourselves comfortable in the online space. So by the time we got to October with that event, our first online digital PM summit, things were pretty comfortable. Of course, people were talking about Zoom fatigue and we worried about people dropping out. But I think as long as you're engaging people with conversations that really matter to them or presentations that relate to or provide some benefit for them, they're gonna stay. And that's definitely what we saw.
Yeah, yeah. What about in terms of organizing an event? Sometimes it can be a challenge to figure out who it's for and who it's not for, and figure out how you communicate that in a way that you make sure that you have the right people in the room, even if it seems like it's a very specific niche. So, for example, digital project managers. Well, you could have a very senior person in the room and a very junior person in the room. And maybe one of them would be kind of checked out because they just aren't getting out of what they need to. So how have you dealt with that challenge?
Yeah, so it's a tough one, especially in project management, because it's really hard to determine what's senior versus junior or advanced versus intermediate, right?
Yeah.
But what we started to do was push speakers for more of that classification so that we could kind of create tracks and know that we would have, if we're having a breakout session, there would be opportunities for people at different levels or even in different situations, being an agency PM versus like an in-house corporate kind of PM. So that was kind of our solution to that. I don't think there's any kind of great answer to that, but I do think that's where the discussion sessions really tie things together, because you get out of that what you put into it, right? So if you've got a burning question and you feel like you're in a group that kind of gets it and is on the same page as you, you're going to get a lot out of that. So again, it's about creating those opportunities for people as much as possible.
What are you, as we record this in August of 2021, the digital project management world has evolved so dramatically in the time that you've been doing your summit. There's so many more tools that are available. There's a very different understanding of working remotely and remote teams now after 18 months of pandemic. So, what is top of mind for people that are in the project management world right now, digital project management world?
Well, tools are always top of mind.
Of course, right.
And people always want to talk about apps. And I'm always the first guy to say, like, hey, we lead with what's up here, not like what's on the computer in front of us. Like, I think our challenges are much bigger than that.
And, for a guy like yourself who said that you want to listen to what the community wants, right? They tell you what you want and you want to give it to them. That's got to be a challenge, right? Because if you allowed them to, they'd probably talk about tools all day.
Yes. And here's the thing about talking about tools all day is, like, you could start talking to me about Zoom and I use Google Hangouts. And so everything that you say goes in one ear and out the other, and I get nothing out of that. But then Zoom gets a big kind of advertisement at the event without being a sponsor, right? Mm. And not that the sponsorship piece matters as much as like relevancy to the entire audience. So I steer clear of tools as much as I can. I think where people are now and where I have really been focused is the perception of the role. And it's something that I've been really focused on from day one. I think the perception of the project management role is really that, they're kind of like the team secretary, or they're not as strategic as, or they're kind of like box checkers, right? Like they're the micromanager, comes in to check and see how a team's doing. That is not at all what digital project management is. And I think I'm more focused on the way people are perceiving that role, the way people are hiring for that role, the job descriptions that they're writing, the way that they're integrating a PM into the team. And I think along with that comes a topic that's really big is just communication and empathy. And, as a PM, you're the person who sits between a client and the team and management. And you have to wrangle all of the details and keep everyone on track and keep the project on budget. And in order to do that, you have to be a really good communicator. You have to be able to adapt to a lot of different communication styles and personalities. And it can be really challenging. And I think that's one of the topics when it comes up, people really latch onto, because I think they're always looking for tactics to be better. To not have issues when it comes to communicating with a team, whether it be in person or remotely. I mean, talk about remote communication, and it's like a whole other world, right? And that's where tools come back into it. So it's kind of like full circle. But it's a really interesting question, because I think at the core, it does come down to people and process, and they're all kind of jumping off points from that.
Yeah. If a young person's listening to this or watching this in the future and they're thinking, this sounds like an awesome field for me, I'd love to go into this, what should they do? What's a good background and training for someone who's interested in being a digital project manager?
Yeah. So check out my book, Project Management for Humans. It's actually a very kind of entry-level book for anyone who is working in an agency space and wants to know more about how to be a good PM, whether you're that by role or not. I also think, check out the digitalprojectmanager.com. So like I said before, is a great website. And Carl and I are actually working on a little boot camp that I'm going to be running probably early next year, training for PMs. I also have a ton of, if you search me on YouTube, I have a ton of free content there too.
That's great. A couple more things I want to ask you about before I let you go. You mentioned Carl Smith, the founder of Bureau Digital, I've had on this show, and a couple of others. Who else was, part of this community? Who else has been a valuable member of this community and helped you to grow it over the years? And I'm also interested in knowing, other than maybe just personal interest, how do you stitch together a community of people that want to be the leaders and want to help to organize this, even if maybe they weren't, I don't know if they had a financial stake in it or not, but, how did you stitch together that community of people in order to be a part of building this community?
Yeah, so actually the person who really championed this with me early on was Greg Hoy. And Greg was the head of HappyCog then. And he really helped with a lot of the community building along with Greg's story. So I think that's as it relates to the Digital PM Summit and that side of the community. I think there are a lot of other people who have worked within the community to do their own work. Like I mentioned, a lot of people kind of creating their own meetups. And some meetups, there are a few women in Austin, Texas, who have been running a meetup for years now that is amazing. It's called Kick-Ass PM, and they have sponsors, they have regular events, they've run it all through the pandemic and have done an amazing job with it. To your question about like, how do you find the people? I don't think you find the people as much as they find you. I think, when you're, the whole idea of starting a community is trying to find your people, right? And of course you find your people, but you don't find the leaders that easily. But what I quickly found was people want to be involved. And if they want to be involved, they're going to say, how can I help? And that is how I built a team of people in Philadelphia to manage the meetup. And I actually handed that off a couple of years ago because it got to be too much for me. And it's still running. And it's happened with the Digital PM Summit. I mean, every year we have a great group of volunteers who come and help us run the event because they want to be there. They also want to experience the event and they just want to help out in some way. So that's just also a message to people. People like me always do need help. A lot of times people will reach out and ask for things. But more than that, people ask if they can give things. Can I give time? Is there something that I can do to help and be a part of this? So I'd say be open and welcoming to those people because you need them for sure. That's how community grows.
So that's the perfect transition into what was going to be my next question, but you kind of answered it already, which was about how to be a good community citizen. And I've been saying for years, I'm a big believer that you shouldn't spread yourself a mile wide and an inch thick. You should find communities where you feel like you belong, where you share values with the community, where you want to get to know more people there. And then you should go deep with that community, and you should offer to give back. You should offer to volunteer for the organizers of that community, see what you can do. Even if it's like sitting at the front desk and checking people in, coming into a meetup or something. So talk a little bit about, we've been talking mostly about as an organizer of a community, an organizer of an event, best practices, but what are some best practices if you're a member of a community and you want to go deeper and you want to have that turn into business? You don't want to be sleazy or manipulative, of course. You want to be a good community citizen. What are some things that you can do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to doing what feels right for you. I think within community, we need volunteers to help, right? And you need those volunteers to be genuine in that commitment. It can't be sleazy. It can't be about finding an opportunity. It has to be about boosting one another up. That's really what it all comes down to. But it's also bringing ideas to the table too. Like when you're starting a meetup, you're really just trying to figure out what's going to work. I can tell you that there were events that we threw where less than 5 people showed up, and we're like, why are we wasting our time on this?
Mental note, do not do this topic again.
Yeah, right. Or we actually started to find, you might laugh at this, like we started to find that people didn't want to do happy hours at a bar. So we stopped doing happy hours at a bar and we started doing more kind of education focused events. And I think, back to your question, really, we figured that out because people came forward and told us what they wanted. And if we didn't have that, I think I would have been scratching my head to try to figure out what people liked to do. So yeah, it's really just about helping one another out. I have to say, through that early community building, I made some really solid friends and some solid business contacts that I still am in touch with today. So I think that's the selfish side of it, is like, you will get the contacts, you will get the benefit long term, but early on you have to be really focused on how you can help other people and how you can grow that community. And sometimes it's bringing other people to events. Sometimes it's just sharing a link on Twitter. Sometimes it's like stepping in and saying, hey, I have an idea for something. Will you guys help me pull it off? Or can I do this for the meetup?
That's great. That's great advice. All right. I have to ask about some of these cool clients you've worked with before we wrap things up. And then I'll have one more question after that. But Zappos, MTV, Ben and Jerry's, you helped redesign their website. You met Ben of Ben and Jerry's. That's so cool.
Did meet Ben. Yeah.
So talk about some of this interesting work that you've done.
Yeah. So, my work in the agency space is, it's been a while. I stopped working in an agency in 2015. So these projects are a little bit older, but my first project at Happy Cog, I worked as I was the PM assigned to the redesign of Zappos.com. So the amazing designers on that team came up with some of the design and UX architecture or information architecture that still lives on that site today. I know going through some airports, like the bins that you put in your stuff in, they go through the conveyor belt. Being in, I think, the Chicago airport, and they were branded. They were Zappos branded. And I was like, oh my gosh, our team actually created that. So it was like a lot of that work spread out in different ways. MTV, I have to say, I was probably a few years into my career at Happy Cog when they came to the table. And I always say, like, 15-year-old me was so excited to get that project, to be able to step into the offices in Times Square and get to meet these people who are working on this product that I thought was really cool. And then essentially what we did was we helped them to create a new online event where fan armies would basically vote on, a number of topics. And then there was a big online live event that we supported. So we traveled and went and did those events and supported in person, I think 3 years in a row. which is really exciting. Also got to work with like really amazing clients like Harvard University. And my favorite part of project management in an agency is the fact that you get a bird's eye view of your client's business, and you get to see how places work, what organizations look like, how they're structured, what personalities are, what works and what doesn't work. And there's a lot that comes along with that, but it's such an education that people don't recognize sometimes in just organizational politics, process, communications. To me, that's the coolest part about that job. It's just, you just learn so much and you meet so many cool people and you get to deliver amazing products too.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. Last question. I call it my gratitude question. If you look around at your peers and your contemporaries, however you want to define that, who do you respect? Who do you admire that's doing good work? You mentioned Carl, you mentioned Greg Hoy, Greg Story, you mentioned a bunch of different people, but anyone else that you would want to call out on the carpet and give them some recognition?
Yeah. I have had the benefit of working with so many amazing people in my career that it's hard to name one person, but I'm going to call one person out. And his name is Anthony Colangelo. He is a developer, probably the most brilliant developer I've ever worked with. He currently is at Big Cartel. And, he's just such a smart guy. He's very easy to work with, but he's also really entrepreneurial. Like I always butcher that word. He is really into space, has created a space podcast. And of course, I'm not remembering the name of it. But basically he's got like over 15,000 subscribers. He's got a Patreon. He's just an interesting human being who does really good work. And I would trust him with any project work that came my way, or probably anything that related to my family as well. So I would call out Anthony.
Excellent. All right, Brett.
He was also 21 when he was hired at Happy Cog. So he's like almost like a little brother to me, which is
cool.
interesting. But yeah, cool.
Cool. Brett, where can people go to learn more about you?
BrettHarned.com.
Excellent. All right, Brett. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
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 And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.